the privilege today to introduce you to someone absolutely amazing that you all need to know. This person is Luke Eastwood. Hi, Luke, how are you?
Hello, hi, Elena. Thank you very much for having me.
So, Luke, you were born in Aberdeen in Scotland and you studied as a professional artist, designer, musician, photographer, and writer. And your main profession is a horticulturalist. You write as well music. You have been playing instruments since the age of 7, such as clarinet, cello, guitar, bass guitar, double bass, piano, synthesizer, and drums percussions. That's amazing. And that's not all. You also have been creating electronic music, your own electronic music, and you are the creator of the band Children of Dub. You have to check that out on Spotify and from Luke's website. I'll put all the links underneath afterwards. You are also a writer. Today we are going to talk about your books. In 2005, you published your first book on spiritual wisdom, which was called The Journey. This lovely book with words of wisdoms, and you really use it every day. You open a page and it's very inspiring. You have reflections about spirituality, and it is something you need to have next to you every day to open and read a page to inspire you for the day. Also wrote about Druidry. You wrote the Druid Primer, who was published in 2012. This is an amazing guide for all those who are interested in Druidry. It's a non-fiction book on Druidry. We'll get to speak better about this later. And The Druid's Garden, which is scheduled to be published in 2021 by Moon Books. But first, this is really, really a book you need to have to go through our times. This is very of actuality. How to Save the Planet. So this is a little book that I love because it's very simple. It's 10 easy steps. 10 easy steps to save the planet, to preserve the environment. And so you have, Luke describes in this book uh, different steps, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And at the end, you have a list that recapitulates everything very simply. So you can just photocopy it and stick it on the fridge, and it reminds you every day uh, how to be a good earthling. So, Luke, I would be delighted if you could tell us about your book, How to Save the Planet, and what inspired you to write it.
Okay, thanks. Well, I've been interested in the environment, I suppose, since I was a kid, really. I remember watching Greenpeace, with all the whales. That was back in the early 80s, so I'd been a teenager then. And that kind of raised a lot of awareness. And since then, people have been talking about environmentalism and the state of the planet and everything's got to change, but nothing's really changed. It's got worse, in fact. So all these people are lecturing us about, oh, this needs to happen, we need to do this, we need to do that. But in the meantime, the corporations have got bigger, they make more money, there's more pollution. The politicians have basically done nothing. They just talk a pile of shite, really. I'm sorry to be a bit rude, but it is. They just talk rubbish. They don't actually do anything to make any difference. So I've read quite a lot of books about environmentalism. Most of them seem to be just talking about what the problems are and not really talking about what you can actually really do. And when they do talk about that, it tends to be very patronizing.
Yeah.
And I think people are sick of being lectured. They don't want to hear all this crap anymore because we all know there's a problem. So repeatedly telling people there's a problem isn't making any difference. It's like standing and looking at the house on fire and saying, hey, look, the house is on fire. isn't it? It's and saying it over and over, but not actually doing anything to put the fire out, you know. So I thought a bit about, well, what would actually be useful to people rather than just sort of repeating the same old mantras that don't really help. So I thought, right, okay, rather than writing some massive book like George Monbiot's done, I write something really short. So I thought, right, 10 things. And I thought, right, I'll keep it to 1,000 words per chapter. So there's a little introduction and there's the 10 steps. So the whole thing is, I think, 11,000 words, pretty much.
Yes, it's very handy little book to have, and I really recommend it. You're very involved in environmentalism, and you are involved as well in Extinction Rebellion.
Yes, yeah. It's not a centralized organization. Anybody can set up a local Extinction Rebellion group. So yeah, I just sent an email to the main one in Dublin and asked them about what to do, and they just said, "Well, just go and just do it." And that's really all you need to do. You set up a Facebook group or whatever, email group, or meet up and somewhere and have a make some kind of a plan. And that's what happened really. And we've done a few actions. And a big thing here in Kerry has been the LNG plant that was planned for the north of the county. And a lot of people are opposed to that. And another thing is like pesticides. The local council here, we have county councils, and they're responsible for things like maintaining all the roads and the borders of the roads, and they're still spraying weed killer everywhere. So yeah, we've done direct actions to try and intervene with to highlight the fact that this is going on, and hopefully to convince people to stop doing this. I'm not suggesting that we should go and live in mud huts and that we all have to become vegan and wear shirts made out of nettles or something. I'm not an extremist, but I think there's an awful lot that we can actually practically do. And I think if people understand the problems and why they're a problem, and then what you can do to change it, it's actually not that complicated. You don't need to rattle on about it for 5 centuries. I think like 1,000 words for each section was actually enough. It was enough to cover everything that I felt I need to say about it.
Yes, I mean this is very handy and very easy steps, such as clean up your mess after you eat outside in nature. Spread the words about protecting environment, plant trees, stop buying stuff that you don't need. All these steps are very simple. You don't need to really do immense sacrifices, just to be sensible. And so I really recommend this book. Look, you have also a page on Facebook which is quite interesting. It's called Neoluddism page. Could you tell us a little bit about it, please?
Okay, well, it's sort of a new version of the Luddite movement, which happened during the Industrial Revolution. It's named after the man who started the movement against the mills. Really, people used to do weaving in small villages, and then along came the sort of automated mills, which were also quite dangerous. Kids would lose their fingers, working in them. horribly noisy and just horrific, really. And the Luddites went around actually breaking them. You know, they were law breakers, but they felt that this was not a benefit to society. And you had like a massive sort of demographic shift from people living relatively poor lives in the countryside, but with probably enough food to eat most of the time, and having space, having nature around them. And then you got massive slums in the cities where the industry grew up. People working horrible jobs, horrible hours, going home to horrible places to live, surrounded by dirt and dust and coal and pollution. So it may have benefited wide society, people may think, but a lot of people, well, they went from a relatively okay life to a horrific life, and that's what caused that movement. Neoluddism really is not against technology per se, but the misuse of technology. The technology being used to benefit just a very small number of people rather than to actually benefit humanity. So, I mean, personally, I think we kind of reached the peak of technological process in terms of its real benefits around 20 years ago. So, at that point we had mobile phones, but, you couldn't really do a whole lot with them other than call and text and maybe play Snake and things like that, And I consider that sufficient. We already had the internet, it was reasonably fast, but what we didn't have was all invasive tablets, smartphones, laptops, Fitbits, iWatches, all the stuff which is now actually takes up almost the entirety of some people's days. And instead of interacting with the world and using technology when it's useful, people's lives have become overtaken by technology completely. They're utterly dependent on them, addicted in many cases. I mean, it's been proven that social media is designed to be completely addictive. So people have become, junkies. Okay. Another thing that I think comes to mind very much at the moment is the fourth industrial revolution. People talking about the Great Reset. Klaus Schwab has written a book called The Fourth Industrial Revolution, which he's the head of the WF, and the plans that he and other people have for the future of humanity are really straight out of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Now, I find them personally extremely frightening, and it's not a future I want to live in. And, I use that page to inform people about the latest developments in robotics, in AI, etc. I'm not, I don't object to the use of robots. I mean, that can save people doing horrific jobs, maybe certain environments like mining or working in a steel mill, etc. It could be really beneficial. Let's save people backbreaking work, but this technology is not going to be used in that way. It's going to be used to actually deprive people of employment and put more money into the hands of fewer and fewer people. And of course, for mass surveillance as well. Another thing is the WF is sort of trying to link this sort of transhumanist agenda with the environment, with the Green New Deal, which if you look into it, the Green New Deal isn't actually very good for the environment, what it will mean is that ordinary people will suffer enormously. You won't be allowed to do lots of things that we have the freedom to do now, or you'll be heavily taxed for it. But really, the big business corporations will be able to carry on doing what they do, and exploiting the planet infinitely, but they'll just have to pay a bit more tax. So it's what I call greenwash. They're trying to appear very green, so ushering in this new technological future, but it isn't really green at all. You can't really have a sustainable future with continued growth, more and more growth all the time. And if you look at what's actually happening, is the wealth is being consolidated more and more by the billionaires, and it'll be ordinary people that live in towns and cities that will suffer. For instance, like, let's say, right, you can't have a fire in your house anymore. So, I mean, if you have a load of scrap wood that you want to burn, for instance, in a stove to heat your house, you'll be banned from doing that. So, if you don't have the money to pay for electricity or for whatever it is, you're going to be freezing cold. So people like him or Jeff Bezos and all these other rich people, they don't have to worry about that. They don't have to worry about paying for the heating or for anything else for that matter. If they were told, oh, you've got to pay 10,000 a year to have your fancy sports car, that's not a problem for them. They could easily just pay an extra 10,000 and have their Ferrari still as that'll be their penalty. But ordinary people will be hit with all kinds of penalties, which will make ordinary life very difficult. So these kind of double standards will mean that they carry on having a nice life. Everyone else will pay for it. And it's being dressed up, with this Agenda 2030 as being, a big advance and all to be great and everyone will be happy. That slogan, you'll own nothing, but you'll be happy. Well, it's all very well them trying to sell us this idea with the lovely advertising, but the reality of it won't be half so nice. And, whether it'll actually benefit the environment at all is rather dubious. It'll benefit them, but is this the right way to solve the ecological crisis? I would say, no, it's not. Really, we need to get away from such a consumerist society. We have amazing technology. We could solve all the world's problems now. We could give everyone a really good standard of living. But in order to do that properly, it would mean that all these billionaires will perhaps no longer be billionaires. Maybe they won't have the level of control in society or in the world that they've got now. And of course, they don't want to give that up. And, this scheme of the WF means that they just carry on doing what they've always done, calling the shots and controlling society. So they don't take the hit for any of this. It'll be all of us, or ordinary people, that take the hit. Yes. So, this really shouldn't be allowed to happen. It's something that if anybody with any sense, if you look into it and investigate what they're actually going to do, you could see that this is not this is purely to benefit the top layer of society, not humanity altogether.
So what you would recommend that we do to get away out of this agenda and not go towards this terrifying future? So what would you advise people do?
I think it's going to require a mass non-compliance. If you think about India, for example, they were part of the British Empire. And before Gandhi came along, it didn't really look as if they would ever escape from it. And he pretty much single-handedly not only managed to gain freedom for India and, well, Pakistan and Bangladesh now, because they split up the country into three. But as a result of India gaining independence, it brought an end to the entire British Empire. And his whole modus operandi was completely non-violent. What he asked people to do was to resist, but to resist through non-compliance, from refusal to comply with the requirements of the system. And it being a massive, massive country, you know, if you've got millions and millions of people who just refuse to do what the government tells them, what can they do? You know, there are only so many soldiers. They were completely unable to enforce the laws. And they did kill people, they did beat people, but the Indians remained united, and under his tutelage, they maintained a non-violent campaign of resistance, and it succeeded. In the end, the British had no choice but to leave, and I think that is the only way that this can be defeated. If you try to fight them with an army, you'll lose. But they can be defeated if people just refuse to comply. There's been nothing they can do. There's not that many of them altogether. The number of people who are trying to implement this plan is actually very small. It's only because we go along with it, and obviously with the help of the police and with the help of armies, they can try to enforce it. But there just aren't, if everybody says no, or a very significant proportion of the population across the world in every country says no to this, it just won't happen.
Yes, it is a power to say no, and their tool is to use medias and to spread fears. But all of this, whatever they use, we have a greater power. It's the power to say no, as you were saying, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, Martin Luther King used the same ideas in America to gain freedom for minorities, especially African American people. They weren't the only people who benefited from that. And of course, they had to deal with tremendous violence. I mean, a huge number of attempts to kill Martin Luther King, which succeeded in the end. But he and his colleagues just kept going, and they took the higher ground, and they succeeded in the end. Thank goodness. And really, that's the only approach that's been proven to work. You know, if you try to have a revolution that's violent, what happens is the same scumbags end up coming in through the back door. You look at what happened after the French Revolution, after the Russian Revolution. You know, you ended up with something that was even worse. So, you know, a violent insurrection against this kind of planned world government won't probably work at all. In fact, it'll probably end up with absolute chaos, followed by despotism of, you know, the order we haven't seen since World War II.
Yes, yes, and that's really the power of the masses is much more powerful than we usually imagine, and it is as well about starving them by not buying what they want us to buy, by not listening, by not letting fear get to us. We have the power. That's what you're saying, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yes, yes. So, look, you are very concerned and involved, concerned by the future of the planet and as well the human species. And there is a dimension in your life which is your spiritual dimension, if I may. You are also a Druid. You've studied long years to become a certified Druid, and you started to write books about Druidry to inform people. So this first one, I would like to introduce you better, the Druid's Primer, which has been published in 2012, is an introduction, and it's more than an introduction to Druidry. It is a guide. It is really the little book, not the book that you need to have if you want to study Druidry, if you want to know what Druidry is about. There is everything about the home that we call home in Ireland, but it's Ogam, written Ogam, alphabet, tree alphabet, all the Celtic festivals, all the rituals and the traditions linked to them, and the philosophy of Druidry. Tell us a little bit about this book, because I think this is the book guide we need to have.
Well, I got interested in, I suppose, Druidry, Celtic religion, really. I suppose my end of my teens, really, I suppose, when I went away to London as a student. It took me a while to find out very much about it. It was very difficult to start with. I had been brought up as a Catholic, and I kind of felt I wasn't happy with that. I looked into sort of the roots of Catholicism and Christianity. I came across so much of paganism that had actually survived and become even parts of it within Catholicism. And so I became more interested in that. I was also interested in other religions around the world as well, like Zoroastrianism and the Hindu, Buddhism, etc. So, but that really struck a chord with me because, as you obviously you know already, I'm interested in the environment, and this, you know, quite an ancient religion, very much steeped in nature, and especially the connection with trees. So that really resonated with me. But one of the difficulties of it is it has been quite underground. I mean, it had disappeared a long time ago, and then a revival began sort of in the very late 1600s, and until fairly recently has been quite a small underground spirituality religion. So I've spent quite a long time reading about this over years and years. So I suppose really is about 15 years worth of research gone into that book. I've got a pretty bad memory, actually. So I had thought to myself, God, instead of having this giant collection of books, wouldn't it be nice to have something that would be a handy reference for my own self, you know? And I thought, well, surely if that might be useful for other people as well. So I was lucky enough. I done quite well, about nearly half the book when I was approached by Moon Books in England, who were looking for people, not me specifically, but because I was involved in a Druid website and maintaining that, the guy that was running that imprint contacted me, and I said, well, yes, I've got something you might be interested in. So it went from there. So, you know, I was very lucky to have that opportunity. And well, I tried to write it for myself, but also so that it would be accessible and easy to follow for other people, but at the same time being comprehensive. Because I've read a lot of books which, you know, I wasn't happy with. They just didn't seem to cover enough, or they were inaccurate, or they just didn't cover a lot of areas. For instance, a lot of what's written about Druids and Celtic culture has left out Ireland in the past. You know, a lot of books talk about Wales and about the Gauls, and completely ignore Ireland, obviously wherever I live. So part of the book was to try redress the balance, to sort of put forward a lot of the Irish knowledge that's been dug up, but largely not made available to the wider public. So,
Yes.
you know, hopefully it's a useful, interesting book for people that are interested in that kind of thing.
Yes, I mean, you go over the main really subject that compose Druidism. You speak about the festivals, the gods and goddesses, the history of Druidism, the cosmology, the elemental forces. And something very interesting, you speak about what is a druid, and especially in our times of change where the whole environment of the planet is really concerning everyone. What would be the role of a druid in our modern times? What would be the service of a druid to the community and the planet?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because obviously things have changed enormously. The original Druids would have had a high status, like, you know, like a professor might have now. Yeah, who would, you know, people would listen to a professor because, you know, they've spent these many years studying and they know whatever their subject is, they're a specialist. So people would tend to give them a bit of respect and listen to what they have to say. So, but nowadays, you know, Druids were involved in uh, the history and the culture of their area, of you know, the king or the lord. They'd have been involved in medicine and healing. They'd have been involved in administering justice. So they, you know, very prominent in those previous times. But nowadays, Druids don't actually have any official role. So, you know, if you go into a court of law, there's not going to be a Druid sat there. There's going to be a judge. There's not going to be, you walk into a doctor's surgery, there won't be a Druid there. It'll be a
we
doctor.
wish it would.
And the same with you know, in academic circles, there won't be a Druid there teaching history or whatever. So I mean, it might happen that some of these people actually are Druids in their private life, but in an official capacity, you know, you're not, you know, not recognized as a person with knowledge or something worth transmitting to humanity. So, although now actually in many countries, Druids have been recognized officially as a religion and have, like, for instance, the right to perform legal marriages, which wouldn't have happened, say, 20 years ago, but that is now the case, which is a step forward. But I would say, in many ways, that the Druids would hopefully fulfill the same functions as in older times, but in a less formal way. They might be able to offer guidance about um, a better way to live, perhaps, about morality, about justice, about the environment, um, and hopefully live by example. You know, for instance, you know, if you're going to go on all day long about how we should look after the environment, you'd hope that that same person would maybe go out and plant some trees or do recycling, etc., rather than just talking about it. And I think very much modern day Druids, it's important to, or what they say, walk your talk. so that you don't just talk about stuff like politicians. We all know that politicians talk endlessly about what should be done or how people should live and what's important, but they're constantly being caught out being hypocrites. You know, even recent examples, people saying, oh, you've got to wear a mask, and they get caught wearing a mask, or you mustn't travel to here, and then they get caught visiting somebody. So they say one thing to the public, and then something else happens in their own lives. And it's only when they get caught out that they're embarrassed and forced to apologize or forced to resign that they actually care. So there's this kind of dichotomy, this terrible hypocrisy which you find in public life. And I think, well, one of the things that's really important within Druidism is the idea of truth. And you'll find that in what's called these triads of sayings. A lot of them talk about truth and how important that is. So, I mean, I think people are sick to death of being lied to, being told one thing and then seeing these people do something else. So I would think that, you know, anybody that's a druid that has some opportunity to influence people, I think the most important thing is sincerity and actually being true to what you believe in. And I mean, I think that's why there's been such a lot of problems in politics in the last 20 or so years, is because people have lost faith in their leaders. They've lost faith in business. They've lost faith in the medical profession, all kinds of different areas of life where, you know, people are supposed to be respectable, supposed to be responsible, supposed to be making decisions for the benefit of the world, for the future of humanity, for, you know, the economy, etc., for the environment. And time again, these people just let us down. So I would say if you're involved in Druidism, really what you want to be making sure you do is not follow the same example of these people, that you actually live what you're trying to suggest people do. I mean, you've got the same problem in a lot of religions. If you look at the scandals in the Catholic Church, I mean, no, it's no surprise really that there's been a massive drop in support for the church, because these priests who people have trusted, you know, have betrayed that trust. And what worse thing can you do than that, really? You know, so I don't think that Druidism is likely to become hugely mainstream in the way that maybe Christianity is, but I certainly think it can be a positive force for change in the world.
Yes, and it is very intertwined with environmentalism. And so you are an environmentalist, you are a facilitator for an Extinction Rebellion group in the west of Ireland. And so Druidism is really part of who you are and part of what you do as well. You are very, also you are a horticulturalist, so that professional, so that is as well part of the same package of who you are. And you wrote this book, which is a complement to the Druid's Primer. You wrote the Druid's Garden, and in this book you not only tell us the history of gardening and working the earth, the soil, but you also tell us about all the symbolism and the spirituality behind all the plants and how to garden in harmony with the seasons and the earth and what kind of soil. It is an amazing tool for all those who are really into eco gardening. So what can you tell us about this book?
Um, the idea came to me a few years ago. It occurred to me that there were a lot of people who were interested in gardening who I knew, who maybe embodied a lot of spiritual ideas, but maybe not in a formal way. You could see they're very close to the earth and very connected to it, but they wouldn't express it in terms of anything formal. Or but I also noticed there's a lot of people in New Age spirituality who maybe bang on about environmentalism, but if you went to their house, you might see that they don't have anything in their garden. They just have this horrible wasteland, a backyard with no plants in it. So I just thought, God, this is all a bit weird, isn't it? You've got people in various types of spirituality, including paganism, who, say they love the earth and they love the environment, etc., but they're not living it. They don't actually know anything about gardening or about growing food or about the earth, or what soil is, or and then you've got a lot of people who are doing gardening who just buy what's in the garden centre. They'll buy Roundup and spray it everywhere because they don't know that it's really bad for the environment. They don't know that it's actually bad for people as well. So I thought, well, what could I do about this? How could I bring all this together in a meaningful way? Because I'm very lucky. I've had a great teacher from Dublin School of Horticulture, a guy called Carl Dacus. He's retired now. And, he really kind of impressed on me a holistic view of gardening, which really, really sunk home. And, in a way, it kind of reflects a larger problem in that we put things in little boxes and we don't see how they're connected. And then that's kind of part of what's created this huge problem in the world where we're on the verge of like ecological catastrophe. So I figured, well, if you could tie together this kind of spiritual ideas, a spiritual belief, with actually practical way of actually making it happen in the real world, in like, your garden, wouldn't that be great? So,
Yeah.
somebody who's maybe spiritually minded, they've got this garden, they don't know anything, but they could just go and turn that patch of horrible brown grass and concrete into something amazing. Or, for somebody who already does gardening, but they'd like to sort of be more in tune with nature, use better methods, maybe a more spiritual approach, that would help them too. So that's why I've written this book. So I suppose I'm fortunate. I'm formally trained as a gardener, and I know about organic methods and biodynamics, etc. But I'm also trained as a Druid. So I figured I could combine these two things together in a way which wouldn't require you to be either, but which could actually help you to have people to have a real understanding of how the environment works, how nature works, and how you could actually simply work with it. You could, even if you've got a tiny little garden that's like, I don't know, say it was only 30 feet by 30 feet, you could transform that from like a completely bare, horrible piece of ground into something that's full of flowers and trees and life, and which would like really benefit the wildlife as well as looking beautiful and fun, an interesting place to be in,
Yes.
because nature is uplifting. You wake up in the morning, you open the back door and you see a beautiful garden full of flowers, and there's bees and birds, and you got a nice little place to sit. That's very inspiring and enjoyable, and as well as benefiting the environment. You open the back door and there's just this horrible wasteland and just with a horrible fence around it. You know, what's inspiring about that? Nothing at all. And it's actually quite simple to do. People don't realize how, you know, how easy it is to make a transformation like that with the right methods, the right instructions. It's like anything, you know, if you when you're a little kid, you get on a bicycle, and if you don't know how to ride it, you fall off over and over again and you hurt yourself. It's not much fun. But if, you know, somebody, you know, helps you, just shows you how to ride the bike, maybe they put the little training wheels on to start with, take them off once you've got the hang of it. Once you've learned to ride the bike, you know, you're not going to fall off anymore. You're fine. You know what you're doing. So I've started from the ground up with real basics, but it's also got more in-depth stuff as well. You know, there's a kind of sections on different kind of trees, which is from the whole of Western Europe. I focused on that because that's where the Druids came from, primarily, up across to where the Danube, really, that region right across to Britain and Ireland, and also, you know, various plants as well. So really, I mean, I think I've covered pretty much everything you need to know in order to get started with, you know, making a decent garden, growing your own food in an organic way. Because I think that's another thing that's vitally important. You know, so many people eat rubbish, you know, people, you know, grow up and they don't know, you know, where a carrot comes from, or, you know, what's in sausages. You know, food has been commodified to such a large extent. It's been industrialized. And you could say, in a way, it kind of ties in with everything else, like the, you know, the manipulation and control of people who eat rubbish food. It, you know, you're unwell, you end up taking loads of medicines. You know, if you're healthy, you get fresh air, you eat proper food, you get exercise, you think more clearly, you're more in control of your own life. You know,
Yes.
people that are sort of sedated, sitting there eating rubbish TV dinners, glued to, yeah, I don't know, crappy telly all day, they're not going to have a great quality of life. But I mean, you can get up and walk away from the telly and, you know, go out, dig up your backyard and grow your own food. It's not as difficult as people think.
Yes, eating living food with a live, living life force is also um, being part of the earth and communing with the earth as well as
Yeah.
many other ways. I believe you work with the plant as living beings, with the plant consciousness as well, when you grow them and you take care of them. Are you working also with the nature devas or spirits of the plants? Is it something you include in your
Yeah,
practice?
that's included in the book. And I mean, I don't go into it in huge detail because it's not for everybody. So, you know, I'd say, you know, personally, I do think plants are consciousness, have consciousness. They are, in a very, very simple way, not like us, but they are aware of what's around them. And I think, you know, tests have shown that they, you know, they do respond to people. And I think if you treat them with respect rather than just, you know, the same as a brick or something, that they actually grow better. And, you know, like everything else, that they are alive, you know, even though they don't have feet or hands or eyes, they do have rudimentary senses, and they are living beings. And just like anything, I do believe in animism. I think they have a right to be here, just like an earwig or a human being or anything does.
Yes.
So I think it's important to treat the natural world not just animals, but plants as well, with a level of respect.
Do you think plants have some teachings for us, sometimes things to show us about life?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, apart from the possibilities of the psychoactive plants that certainly can change your perspective, just even just simple things like going for a walk in the woods. It's been proven that trees produce chemicals that actually stimulate the brain, that you just breathe them in when you go into the forest and enable people to relax. So even something as simple as that can actually be greatly beneficial. Say you're feeling really stressed and you're worrying about some problem, unconsciously you will be breathing these chemicals in when you go for a walk in the woods. You might find that it might give a subtle shift in your mental state, and you might feel a lot better when you finish your walk. You know, without even realizing it, you may have been subtly affected by the trees.
Yes.
Okay, that's difficult to prove in any kind of statistical way, but um, if you believe that life is connected, that um, all life uh, interacts with other life in a sort of a thread, like a spider's web, perhaps, then everything that happens has a knock-on effect, and even plants can have a beneficial effect for animals and for human beings. And you know, perhaps it's wrong to just dismiss them as, oh, it's just that's just a daisy. It's nothing really. It's not important. Okay, on an individual level, they're not particularly uh, part of our life or what we think is important. But um, even something as small as that has its purpose and can make a difference in the world.
Yes, totally. If all humans would reconnect with the earth, it would certainly make a change. And I believe all listening to you, I believe all gardening should be in fact spiritual gardening, because you work with the spirit of the plants, but as well it teaches you about your own spirituality, because you reconnect with nature and with who you are.
Yeah, I think another thing is when you have to put effort into something, you appreciate it more. I mean, when I've grown, say, like a bunch of leeks, I had to look after them, water them, feed them. And then when I finally pull them up and bring them in to eat them, you know, not only are they better for you because it's not full of pollutants, it's also very fresh. So it still has the life energy in it. But you really appreciate you've taken this thing, you've watched it grow from a seedling into something that you're then going to eat. And, you know, you have a different awareness. You've had to put work into it. And you also, I feel grateful for, you know, for its life, that it's actually benefiting me. And I've had an input into its life growing. So, you know, when you just get everything handed to you, you don't really appreciate what you're getting. Whereas if you understand the process and you've been involved in it, it's a lot more meaningful. And I think you can't help but have a sense of gratitude for it.
Yes, I totally agree with you, and I'm sure everybody who will listen to this will as well. This makes so much sense. And you describe as well in your book something very intriguing for those who are not familiar with Druidism. It's gardening with the four elements, with no spoiler.
Okay,
Very
well,
good.
it's actually not that complicated. There's in the sort of the Western tradition of what we call Neoplatonic elements. There's four elements: earth, air, fire, and water. And in terms of gardening, that really means the soil, obviously the air, the sun, and the rain. And there's many different ways you could work with this. You can actually set up, I think detailed in the book, like a special garden which orientates with the 4 directions and the 4 elements. It's not necessary to do this, but for people that are really have an interest in this idea, it does bring a sort of spiritual, magical element to the gardening, in much the same way that people that may know about biodynamic gardening. That again is something that takes the idea of organics to a different level. It has a spiritual dimension to it, rather than just being simply ecologically sound.
Yes, yes, that is that is that is absolutely fascinating for all who discover that. So I will really recommend this book if you are into starting your own garden or spending more time in your garden if you have already one. This is a wonderful guide of, I would say now, spiritual gardening. um, it's really great. It's going to be available in March 2021. And there is a little plus in this one for those who know my illustration work. I have illustrated this book. So this is one example on the history of gardening, and with all the explanations. For instance, this one of the different parts of the plant. There is scientific data, spiritual data. It is, I think, a complete guide, and so I will put a link underneath as soon as it is available for you to buy.
I must, I
Yes.
must say, I do love the illustrations. They really are fantastic. I know I'm obviously biased, but yeah, it really does add something special to the book.
Thank you. So I think we have pretty much gone around your work about spirituality, of the earth spirituality, earth philosophy, earth activism and involvement in environment causes, and as well the whole beauty of the spirit of Gaia and of our planet, and the way how to live in harmony with our planet and with who we are, because when we reconnect to our planet, we reconnect with who we truly are. And so do not forget as well this one, the journey. The journey is, as I was saying at the start, a little guide of every day with little thoughts, just little thought. You open a page each day, and you have a message for the day. So look, this was absolutely fascinating. And what would be now your message to the world, to humanity, to your message to people? What would you like to say?
Well, I think we live in really interesting, challenging times. So I kind of consider myself lucky to be alive now at this time where something major is happening. But it's also quite a scary time to be in because we really don't know how it's all going to work out. And, you know, the future of the world, the future of humanity is really in the balance at the moment. What we do now is going to shape the future for generations to come, perhaps even thousands of years. So I would say, I think the most important thing really is to know who you are. You know, that's a really ancient idea anyway, know thyself. But, you know, I think it's even more important now because people are exposed to so much in a way of different influences. You know, before radio, before television, people were kind of isolated to a large extent. You lived in your community. Now we're exposed not just to radio, television, we've got social media, Netflix, etc. We're constantly bombarded with information from all kinds of sources, different opinions, you know, people telling you this is right, this is wrong, this is fake news, this is the truth. So, I mean, it's a really difficult time for people. And I think if you know, if you have a strong sense of who you are, what you believe in, what your values are, then you can kind of fight your way through all this mess. So I would say it's really important to try and keep an open mind and to maybe get away from all the chattering voices in the different ear, constant noise, and take the time to figure out what you really believe in and follow through on what you think is important in life. Because, you know, this time we're in now cannot be lived again. What happens now in these times in the next few years is so crucial to the future of the world. So, you know, if you want to play a part in that, you need to know who you are and what you believe in and what you think is really important. So for people who haven't already figured that out, I'd say really, you know, go and take some time away from all this noise and figure out what you really believe in. It doesn't matter really what, you know, if it's different from what other people may think. It's really just about being true to yourself and knowing your own self. And, you know, how can you be true to yourself if you don't know what are your values, what you really believe is right? So, yeah, that's what I would recommend to anyone. My message be to know yourself and be true to what you believe in.
Thank you very much. These are very wise words, and I'm very thankful for this time you gave to explain all about your wonderful work. So, Moonbook, nearly to be published in March 2021. The Druid's Primer, The Journey, little everyday book of wisdom, and this one, which is quite handy, How to Save the Planet in 10 steps, 10 easy steps. Easy but crucial. So, Luke Eastwood, thank you very much. And I am sure, yeah, there's a lot
Thank
of
you so
people.
much for having me.